Welcome back to the channel, guys. On this episode, I'm going to break down the fight between Charles "Do Bronx" Oliveira versus Michael Chandler that takes place this Saturday at UFC 309. And spoiler alert, why I think Michael Chandler will never be champion in the UFC. But first, like and subscribe, guys. Really appreciate the support that I've gotten so far. Having a lot of fun with this channel, so I just hope you guys are getting a little bit of value out of my breakdowns and picks. So if you are, comment, let me know your thoughts, and appreciate it. So in preparation for this fight, been obviously going through and watching all of the fights between Charles Oliveira, actually the one fight that they had, and then just their fights leading up to it. And one of the big things I noticed was Charles Oliveira's most recent fight against Arman Tsarukyan. So Tsarukyan has very good wrestling, and he's pretty defensively sound, jiu-jitsu wise, to not. He was getting caught by Charles Oliveira, but not to get caught to the point where he's submitting or giving up dominant position. He's really willing to just kind of float on top of Charles, let him kind of decide where he wants to go, stay on top, and just stay very positionally dominant on him. Not taking a lot of chances, not throwing huge punches or leaving an arm out there for Charles Oliveira to take advantage of. And I think that's why we saw Charles lose that fight. He just got kind of controlled on the ground the last two rounds, which is a concern of mine, slightly, just seeing how Charles got controlled in that fight, got controlled by Islam, and got controlled a little bit by Beneil Dariush in the beginning of that first round. But I think the difference between Tsarukyan and Chandler, though, is Chandler refuses to be boring. He prioritizes excitement in his fights over keeping the position, staying defensively sound, landing punches. He's just not the type of guy who's going to stay in a position that might be deemed boring. He's kind of a crowd pleaser type guy. Everything's big, everything's flashy, looping right hands, big takedowns, big slams, even when it's just not very advisable from a winning perspective to do so. We saw in that fight with Tsarukyan, Charles had a lot of deep chokes. He had a guillotine choke. Speaking of the guillotine choke, before I get to my next point, I think Charles wins that fight if Tsarukyan's shorts don't come off. That's Charles's, and I'm not coping here, but Charles's go-to move is the guillotine choke. If Charles's pants don't start to slip down and give him a little room to escape there, I think Charles wins that fight. But besides that, there was a deep darce choke that Charles puts in. Charles is very crafty with his blood chokes, with his darces, his anacondas. And in that fight, Tsarukyan does the proper defense of a darce, which is to land flat on your face. So this is not the most appealing way of fighting. Definitely doesn't make you look like you're winning the fight by any means. Isn't a very crowd-pleasing style, but this is the most effective defense to a darce choke. I do jiu-jitsu. I've gotten guys in plenty of darces. This is the defense. It's very frustrating. Is it sexy? Is it flashy? Are you spinning out of it? Are you jumping out of a move? No, but it is the most effective way, because eventually your arms are going to get tired and you have to let go of this choke. The difference here between Tsarukyan's, winning style, I'm going to come in with a high IQ game plan. I'm going to stick to it. I'm not going to do anything stupid against an absolute savage like Charles that can catch me with, a punch from anywhere, a teep kick, a flying knee. He's got every submission of the book. You will never see Chandler do this. Chandler, he would never lay face down in the octagon for 30 seconds to 60 seconds to stay out of a choke. He's going to be doing something stupid in this position. He's going to be, exploding out of it. He's going to be, anything other than textbook defense in this position. Tsarukyan would lay face down for 2 rounds straight right there if it meant he was going to get out of this choke and it gave him a chance to potentially win the fight later. I feel like Chandler's willing to lose a fight as long as it's fun, as long as it's crowd pleasing, as long as the blood and sweat's flowing and people are going to say, oh, what a great fight, you're a savage, fight of the night, KO of the night, blah blah blah. Chandler's he's more willing to get that fight friendly type of reputation than he is to grind out a smart, effective game plan against a very dangerous fighter. And I don't see him I just don't see him having that style, especially at this stage in his career, where I feel like he wants to be known not as the UFC champion, not as the two-time, or not as a multi-organization champion. He wants to be known as the guy who had the crazy fight against so-and-so and put on this performance against this guy. Like, he wants to be the highlight of the UFC versus being the guy who's on a winning streak and who's dominating the lightweight division, because I feel like he could. Maybe his time's past him now, but I feel like he does have the skills, the background to be a real force in the division. But I just feel like I'm just constantly shaking my head. I mean, I'm entertained, don't get me wrong. Very entertaining fighter. I constantly find myself just looking at my wife or just shaking my head like, what is he doing? You know, like, how many times do we see Michael Chandler do some dumb shit in the UFC? Just off the top of my head, he's beating Dustin Poirier. Beating Dustin Poirier in that fight. I think it's third round. He's up one, maybe up two. I can't remember off the top of my head, but gets a great takedown on Poirier. Instead of just putting him on the ground, camping half guard, putting him on the ground, landing in full guard, and landing punches, he wins that fight, two rounds to three. But instead, the meathead Michael Chandler has to have this big old slam and tries to slam Poirier onto the ground. Poirier, the more savvy jiu-jitsu guy, the longtime black belt, you know, he hits the ground, immediately bumps up, takes his back, chokes him out. The Gaethje fight, having a lot of success on the feet, but as soon as he starts to feel like he's losing the edge on the feet, he just turns into this, I'm going to throw meat cleavers and entertain the fans versus maybe rethink my strategy in this fight. Maybe shoot takedowns, maybe spam a few takedowns, get Gaethje to be thinking about the takedowns, coming over top with his right hand that's like a sledgehammer. But instead, he's spitting out blood on the canvas, trying to look like a hard ass. He's, hands down, taking punches straight to the face from one of the hardest hitters at 155 pounds. I just don't get it. I mean, I could probably think of some other, the last fight with Charles Oliveira. Having tons of success, took him down, dropped him on the feet, taking him down. And what's he do? He comes out, instead of just understanding that Charles is a guy who can put your lights out or submit you at any second, he really comes out gun blazing, loses kind of all the respect that he has for Charles Oliveira on the feet, ends up getting clipped and put out. So I think at this point in his career, maybe he is or he isn't, but I think he is not. He doesn't have the... He definitely has the physicality and the skill, but he just doesn't have that IQ and that willingness to just stick to maybe a boring, less exciting, more boring game plan to win. If he goes in there against Charles Oliveira, he could probably take Charles Oliveira down, stay out of submissions, land some ground and pound, and he could win that fight. The same with Poirier. Justin Gaethje hasn't shown the greatest ability to use his D1 wrestling to stay on the feet. You know, we saw him get taken down by Khabib. We saw him get taken down by Islam. We've seen him get outstriked by Max Holloway. So you can beat him, but Chandler just doesn't want to take the path of least resistance because in his mind it's not fun, it's not exciting, people won't be talking about it as much. But imagine how much people would be talking about you if you were 5-0 or whatever. What is he in the UFC now? How many fights has he had? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of these fights were winnable fights. Should have won this fight, could have won this fight. Beat Tony Ferguson, almost got chinned by Tony Ferguson. Old man Ferguson almost chinned him 4 fights into his 8-fight losing streak. Dustin Poirier was winning that fight. Conor McGregor, he can win that fight. He's got great low kicks. We've seen Conor, he's susceptible to low kicks. Conor doesn't have the greatest takedown defense. We saw that against Khabib. Saw that against Chad Mendes at 145. Conor can get taken down and beat up. Even I think Poirier did that a little bit. And Poirier is not known as the best, offensive wrestler in the world. So, I just think that at this point in Chandler's career, he's more about just being entertaining, being inspiring to the fans. I don't know how many times I have to listen to him in an interview talk about how he just wants to be this inspirational guy when, tell people that they can do anything, which is great and everything. I'm not beating him up about that, but imagine how inspiring it would be coming over and doing what you got to do to win, to make more money, to put more money into your pocket, to support your family, to be that inspiration for these people, because you're actually going out there, you're staying disciplined, and putting together a game plan that allows you to get your hand raised at the end of the night. Not just to be this entertaining type of guy. So I think Charles Oliveira beats him. I think in that last fight, Charles is going to learn. I think he's going to be the better striker still. I don't think he's going to allow himself to get caught. I think if it does go to the ground, you're going to see Charles able to get back up to his feet if he wants, or submit Chandler on the ground. He's gone up against a lot of guys that are much better than Michael Chandler on the ground, and he's seen success either in submission attempts that he almost got, or allowing himself to get back up to his feet. I think what is it that fight against Tsarukyan, like I said, those 2 chokes he got Tsarukyan, who is very elite when it comes to jiu-jitsu, he finishes Michael Chandler with those. Beneil Dariush, he had his troubles on the ground. Beneil Dariush, another very high-level elite grappler, able to defend there, able to get back up to his feet. Beneil was kind of gassed, pushed him up against the fence, knocked him out, ground and pound. Islam Makhachev, again, that was very fluky night for Charles Oliveira. I don't want to talk about it, honestly. Very upsetting for me. But I think a lot of these performances that we've seen from Charles Oliveira, if he comes out and performs the way that he did, if he comes out like a bat out of hell like he did against Beneil Dariush, throwing his teep kicks, aggressive off of his back, not accepting position on the back, getting up as soon as if he gets up against Michael Chandler off the ground, Chandler's going to be a little gassed. His hands or his shoulders are going to be full of blood. He's not going to be able to throw as much as he can. I think that Charles, he can take advantage of those positions as they're transitioning from the ground up to the feet with the hands, or from the feet to the ground with his submission. So he's very crafty off of his back. So I feel like Charles has a lot more tools to win this fight than Michael Chandler does. Michael Chandler needs to rely on his boxing, but it's not putting himself out of position and throwing big haymakers to where he can get countered, or he needs to just stay defensively sound on the ground and beat up Charles for the majority of the fight. Another thing we need to take into consideration is this is 5 rounds. You've seen Chandler able to go the distance. I know he went 5 rounds several times back in Bellator. Islam, I am concerned about his gas tank, but I think he's going to be more than prepared for this fight. He's only 35. Didn't take a lot of damage in his last fight. Really hasn't taken any damage since he fought Islam back in a little over 2 years ago. So I think he's going to be the fresher fighter. I think he's not going to be as discouraged as Michael Chandler is. He did lose to Arman Tsarukyan, but again, guy's elite. He did win a round. You could argue he won 2. I don't think he did, but it was a split decision. Whereas you've got Michael Chandler, who last win was Tony Ferguson, who was on an 8-fight losing streak and now out of the UFC, then lost to Dustin Poirier, and then he sat on the sidelines now for like 2 years waiting on that Conor McGregor fight. I can't blame him. Big money fight, but it is what it is. I think he should have came back earlier, because now he is 38. So he's been on the couch for 2 years now. He's 38 years old. And granted, he didn't come into the UFC, in his prime. He came into the UFC, 4 years ago? He was already 34, 35, probably on the back end of his career. And now you're coming in fighting arguably one of the best lightweights of all time, one of the best lightweights currently in the division. And you're coming into it off of a 2-year layoff and having already lost to this guy, and in a 5-round main event. I just don't think those are good odds for Michael Chandler. So I don't know. Listening to him in his interviews, I think he recently had an interview with Ariel Helwani, saying that he thought he backpedaled on this, saying that Charles Oliveira is a quitter, but then he said, I used to think he was a quitter. Saying that he was seconds away from beating Charles Oliveira. If there was a different ref, he would have won that fight, this and that. Like, that just doesn't seem like the best headspace to be in, that going into this fight, which is the biggest fight of your life, and one that Charles Oliveira is coming for you. He's prepared. He wants that belt back. So just listen to the what he was saying in that interview, going off on tangents about being inspirational. It sounded like Michael Chandler, like he listened to like a David Goggins inspirational YouTube playlist on the way in there, and he was just spamming like inspirational quote one-liners the entire time. It was kind of annoying. I think being inspirational is having the discipline and the game plan and the fight IQ to win the fight, not just to go out there and have a slobber knocker and lose brain cells for the entertainment of the fans. Like, I don't think that's what your fans want. I don't think that, well, that is what the fans want. I don't think that's what your family wants. I think that if he has a more measured approach, he stands a lot better chance of beating these guys in the top 10 in the lightweight division. I just don't think he, at this point in his career, I think big, exciting fights are more important for him, or just as important for him as being the champion, to where if the cards are stacked against him, if he's starting to lose a fight, he's not going to dig down and rethink his game plan and how I can win. He's going to think of what's the biggest, flashiest thing that I can do in each round to get eyeballs on me, get people talking about the fight. Not what's the boring decision that's the right, smart, correct decision right now that I need to be making to turn this fight around. So I'm going to go Charles Oliveira. Can't imagine he's not a favorite considering he won the last fight. He is minus 265. So I think that's about right. Considering Chandler's layoff, how Charles looked in the Beneil Dariush fight, maybe not so much the Arman fight, but I think Charles gets this. More ways to win. Maybe not as powerful on the feet, but he does place his shots much better than Michael Chandler, which sometimes leads to more and better knockouts. Not always the hardest you get hit. It's the placement. It's the timing. He can shoot takedowns as well. I wouldn't be surprised if he, mixed it up and kept Michael Chandler on his toes by shooting for takedowns. And if Michael Chandler gets on top, you are not safe ever in a fight on top of Charles Oliveira when he's throwing up submissions. So I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. Pretty confident in this pick. One of my favorite fighters. One of my wife's favorite fighters. Going to go with Charles Oliveira in this one. So appreciate you guys watching. Again, like and subscribe if you can. Comment. Let me know what you guys think. And until next time. Thanks, guys.